Hi, I'm Adam, and this is Hope Reserved, where we think through Bible, theology, and worldview. Today we're going to start a series on the book of Isaiah. And I wanted to do Isaiah because it has so many great themes and elements that are present throughout Scripture, and it kind of puts it all together into one book. And today we're going to just be doing an introductory lesson on kind of the background and the historical context of Isaiah, a little bit about the prophet, and then also we're going to be looking at some of the major themes that are present in the book of Isaiah. So the first thing I wanted to look at was the background of the book. So the book of Isaiah was written sometime between 740 and 680 BC, and the original audience was Judea and Jerusalem. So the book is about judgment and the future restoration of Jerusalem and Judea. And the author is Isaiah, the son of Amos. And the book of Isaiah is made of two halves, so chapters 1 through 39 and chapters 40 through 66. So there's been some debate about whether Isaiah is written by the same person. And there's a number of linguistic parallels between the two halves. So, for example, the phrase "the Holy One of Israel" outside of Isaiah it's found 6 times, but within the first half of Isaiah it's found 12 times, and then it's found 14 times in the second half. So now I wanted to go a little bit onto the background of Isaiah. So the prophet Isaiah was born during the reign of Uzziah, the king of Judah, between 791 and 740 BC. And the name Isaiah means the Lord is salvation. And with names in the Bible, a lot of times the name has significance. So it's important to look into the name and kind of understand the significance to the overarching story. So the Lord is salvation. And I think that's a great name for a prophet that is talking about God saving Israel out of 2 exiles, and also talking about a Messiah who would ultimately save the world from their sins. So Isaiah's ministry started the year that King Uzziah died. So this is 740 BC. And that's in chapter 6, verse 1. So the prophet lived in a relatively stable and prosperous time for Judea. And he may have been part of a royal family, or he was at least given access to the court, the kingly court, because he was a prophet. And if you read in the Bible, sometimes the kings would consult the prophets to kind of hear what God's will is in certain situations. So Isaiah was married, and he had 2 sons shortly after his call to become a prophet. So his first son is Shear-Jashub, and this is in chapter 7, verse 3. And his name means the remnant shall return. And, sorry, this name's hard. Mehazer Shalal Hashbaz, and this is chapter 8, verse 1 through 4. And his name means quickly or speedily. So again, there's significance in those names. So both were children when Judea was being invaded by Assyria and Ephraim in 735 or 734 BC. So some historical background now. So the Assyrian Empire became a growing threat to Judea and Damascus and Israel. Israel and Damascus joined forces against the Assyrians, and King Ahaz of Judea refused to join forces with Israel and Damascus, and they responded by invading Judea. King Ahaz appealed to Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria to help, even after Isaiah offered a strong warning against doing such a thing. So that's chapter 7. Assyria helped Judea conquer Israel in 722 or 721 BC. And this, however, made Judea a soft target. And in 701 BC, Sennacherib of Assyria threatened the holy city of Jerusalem. And King Hezekiah, who followed God, prayed that God would help him. King Hezekiah, who followed God, prayed for help. Isaiah told King Hezekiah that Assyria would withdraw from Jerusalem. And this account is actually found in the archaeological record. They found in Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria, they found King Sennacherib's account of this situation. So Judah was given the status of unwilling vassal state, while Israel lost its land in 733 BC. During King Hezekiah's reign, there was a number of attempts from Judea to rebel against the Assyrian rule. The Assyrian conflict ended with the fall of Israel and the siege of Samaria, and Judea increased hostility in around 740 BC. So the prophet Isaiah warned the nation of Judea that its disobedience to God would lead to them being taken captive by Babylon. The king of Babylon sent an envoy to King Hezekiah, and this event foreshadows the future captivity by Babylon. In the book of Isaiah looks at the destruction of Judea and beyond to a future release from captivity. God's people would be led out of Babylon, and just as they have been brought out of Egypt. So Isaiah kind of looks at this idea of release from captivity. And the Jewish people have had quite a history of being held into captivity by Egypt, by Assyria in this situation, and in the future in Babylon. So that's kind of a common theme that goes throughout the book of Isaiah. Isaiah also looks at the rise of a king that would overthrow Babylon. And this was King Cyrus of Persia. And he united the Medes and Persians against Babylon. What Cyrus did enabled God's people to return to the promised land. And it's also representative of what Jesus would do, not only to save people from captivity of their sins, but also what he will do on the day of the Lord, when he basically, you kind of have this idea, just like Egypt coming out of, just like Israel coming out of Egypt, you have this idea of God's people being freed from the rule of the wicked kingdoms of the world. So that's kind of this idea on the day of the Lord. So some major themes in Isaiah. Isaiah is about judgment and salvation. God judges his unfaithful people, but he also rescues them and redeems them. Isaiah also points to a future day of the Lord, where God will punish the nations as God has punished Israel. And then even in judgment, God will keep a righteous remnant for himself. And then another theme is the theme of fire representing judgment. And you see that in chapter 1, 31 and 30, verse 33. And then there's threads of God bringing Israel out of the nations that have taken them captive. So just as God led them out of Egypt. So this is chapter 43, verse 2, and then chapter 16 through 19, and then chapter 52, 10 through 12. Another theme is that of a highway, where God's people will return from exile. So this is chapter 11, verse 16, and chapter 40, verse 3. And then Isaiah foretells a future time of peace, where a king from the line of David would sit on the throne, and he would rule the earth in righteousness. So that's chapter 11, verses 6 through 9, and chapter 9, 7, and chapter 32, verse 1. And then at that time, the nations will come to Jerusalem to worship God. So this is chapter 2, verses 2 through 4. God's people will no longer face oppression and trouble at the hands of human rulers. So chapter 11:14 and 45:14. And then there's also this idea of the nation of Israel and the Messiah or the servant being God's servant. So this is chapter 42 through 53, chapter 41 verses 8 and 9, and chapter 42 1. And then the servant's role. So the servant role kind of speaks of Israel as a nation as a whole, and it also speaks of the future Messiah, which we believe is Jesus. So it talks about having a prophetic and a kingly role. And you kind of look at this in terms, Isaiah looks at it in terms of Moses and David. And then both of these were leaders of Israel. They kind of had these kingly roles. And the servant would also hold this same kind of kingly role. And then Isaiah predicts future rulership of the Messiah on the earth, his faithful and righteous citizens, and a restored earth. So that's chapters 65 and 66. So now I want to go on to the outline. So chapters 1 through 39 is about judgment. Judgment is directed at the nations of the earth. And then chapters 40 through 66 is about comfort. So Isaiah brings about comfort to God's people, telling them about God's plan of salvation and future promise of redemption and restoration. The book covers 3 historical situations: Judah under Assyria, exile in Babylon, and Judah after the time of the exiles. And then finally I want to go through some themes that weave throughout the book of Isaiah. So there's two themes that flow throughout the book, which are God's holiness and Jerusalem as the holy city. So Jerusalem was a place where the temple, and also where it was also a political center for Israel. And the theme asserts that the city and its residents should reflect God's holiness. Because the book looks to the future day of the Lord, where a descendant of David would sit on the throne and rule the earth from Jerusalem. Well, Isaiah is calling the people to the holiness that God calls for his people, and he wants the city of Jerusalem, the holy city, to reflect God's holiness. So this theme looks at both the people at the time needing to go beyond the outward appearance of holiness, and then to an inner holiness of heart. So Isaiah was calling the nation to repent and to have genuine faith. Don't just look like it on the outside. Don't just follow religious practices. Have a true desire to be obedient to God and a true desire to be faithful to God. So many of the leaders in Isaiah's time didn't see God's hand in the current events of the day. They didn't see God's hand in the decisions they made or those sorts of things. And Isaiah was calling the leaders that God was involved and that they needed to put their faith in God rather than in their own decisions. We kind of see that with the situation with King Hezekiah when King Sennacherib from Assyria was coming to destroy Israel. When he turned to God, God helped him. So Isaiah is calling the kings of Israel to put their faith in God and trust that he is involved in the world and is actively involved in their lives and their decisions. So God's salvation and ultimate purpose, the focus isn't so much on bringing people out of exile so much as it is turning away from sinful behavior and living by faith and obedience to God. So that kind of sums up the book of Isaiah. And I think this is a great place to start. And we're going to be going through the entire book. I'd like to go chapter by chapter and really dig into it and see what we can learn from it. And I may take a break here and there and look at some other things as well, but the goal is to get through Isaiah. So thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll continue to listen through the book of Isaiah.